welcome Mauricio from Agaric to our meetup today. He graciously volunteered to present on upgrading to Drupal 8 or 9, probably 9 at this point, using the Migrate API. So I think Mauricio probably can do a better job explaining all the cool things he's been up to. And take it away, Mauricio. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and thanks everyone for being here today. This is what I'm going to present. The slides and demo are available on GitHub, so feel free to have a look after the fact. And you can interrupt me at any time if you have questions or leave it at the end, however you prefer. My name is Mauricio Dinarte. I go by dinarcon on Drupal.org, Twitter, and pretty much anywhere on the internet. That's my email and my Drupal.org profile. I am from Nicaragua. It is about 85 degrees at the moment, and it is about the same temperature all year round. So if you ever need to escape some cold winters from the States, you can come down here. Beautiful country with a lot of nature, including active volcanoes that you can actually walk to the crater and look down to see a lava lake like this one, or go to that website and have that virtual experience. I work with Agaric. We are a Boston-based company, but we work distributed around the world. I myself, I am Nicaragua. We have people in Mexico, Germany, and a couple of collaborators in the States as well. As an announcement, Agaric is offering full day trainings about these topics, about migrations and upgrades in 2 weeks from now. So if you're interested, there are a lot of offers going on. So either contact us from the contact page or ask me anything after the session. I also very passionate about teaching, and I started this website called understanddrupal.com, where I write about Drupal site building and a lot of migrations lately in English for the most part, but I also try to do Spanish and French, and I plan to do like text and video in the future, so check that out. One of the things that I did last year was write a series of 31 articles about migrations, and you can like read and basically learn from nothing to understanding a lot of how the Migrate API works. And I also have a course where I also talk about Drupal migrations, so feel free to check that out. But let's get started with the topic of today, like upgrading to Drupal 8 or 9 using the Migrate API. One thing to note, we are going to mostly do a live demo today, but it is important to understand that the API itself is an implementation of the extract, transform, and load design pattern. So this is something that is not exclusive to Drupal. It's a very well-established field with tools implemented for different frameworks for different languages. So if you want to learn about this in general, that book is a recommended reading. Or if you have experience before, anything that you know about ETL also applies for Drupal. The one thing important is that when you, I assume that you have some experience with migrations. When you do a Drupal upgrade, there is some basics that you need to know. But just like as a refresher, like in the Migrate API, you are going to find source, process, and destination plugins. And it is very important, maybe this is the first time that you hear this concept, that you learn to categorize like this plugin belongs to which category, because that will help you understand how like the migrations are supposed to be written. For example, when you have one specific migration, let's say you want to import articles, then you have a source that in this case, we're going to be migrating from a Drupal 7 database. So that means I will be using the SQL database source plugin. I am going to be writing to nodes. So I'm going to be using the nodes destination plugin. And in my transformations, I can do anything that is needed. For example, combining fields or splitting fields, combining content types or separating them, changing from one entity to another. So any transformation that I need to do along the way would be the responsibility of process plugins. And the Migrate API try as much as possible to respect the ETL paradigm. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, it tried to, to follow this approach as much as possible. This is a very, very simple example. If you have, let's say, in your Drupal 7 site, a content type that has a first name and a last name field, and you want to combine those in a single field in Drupal 8 or Drupal 9, you just like say that from your source, read the value, do some processing, in this case, a concatenation of the two first name and last name, and then you put them in the destination, which is the name field in Drupal 8 or 9. So just like a refresher of what it is assumed to know for being able to do migrations, particularly upgrades, more easily and more effectively. So let's dive right in. This is going to be a live demo, so many times things go wrong. Hopefully it will not be the case today. So just like these are the trainings that I mentioned, these are the articles. So literally from nothing to understanding different concepts. This is the course that I mentioned as well. And this is the site that we're going to use as a demo today. This is like the Drupal 9 site, and this is the Drupal 7 site. So before jumping into like the command line and trying to start doing the examples, in any migration project, no matter if it is an upgrade from a previous version of Drupal or not, it is very, very important to understand your source, how it is configured, the format, the restrictions, if there are any edge cases in the data that you need to account for. So you need to have a good sense of how your source is. In this case, this is a Drupal 7 site. So let's have a look at of what we're going to try to migrate. We have a node for the homepage. We have a view that has information, about general articles. And if I were to visit one specific, I can see that it has an image, it has some text, it has some tags as well. The next thing that we have is a view for events. And similarly, just like a summary in this case, but if I were to click on one node of type event, I see that I have a date with time, I have price, I have, this is a reference to another node. We have an integer field for capacity. We also have the text and the tags. In the case of products, we have a view where people can do some basic filtering here, and similarly images, prices, descriptions, and we have the contact form. So that's basically it. And if we were to look in the content types definition themselves, we can see, for example, that the location that was being referenced from before, it's its own content type, and the book, which we're going to see an example of that later, it's also its own content type. So we're going to see how these things play together later. And something that we didn't see before is that we have a content type, which is used to store information about people. So if I were to these are some examples. If I were to click on Michelle, I can see that the favorite book that was its own content type is being referenced here as well. So this is basically what we're going to try to migrate. And as I go through the example, I'm going to be explaining some assumptions that the Migrate API does, what are some of the limitations, and show different approaches of how to go about upgrading your site. So this is kind of the end result. So what I'm going to do is blow up this site and start from scratch. So in order to do this and to save some time, I'm going to be using the command line and Drush to execute various commands. So the first thing that we're going to notice is that I'm going to be installing Drupal using the minimal installation profile. And I do this, oops, yeah, there's nothing to be, yeah. So I'm installing Drupal using the minimal installation profile. And I do this because this is like, if you go by the book, if you go to the official documentation and read what they recommend, this is basically it. The reason for starting with the minimal installation profile is because this one contains like the bare minimum to have a Drupal installation. For example, the content type article page, that taxonomy vocabulary called tags, none of that is created. Many modules like views UI, field UI, those are not enabled. The idea is that you have a clean slate that you can start working with. And the reason is when you do an upgrade by default, it will try to import everything, content, configuration, everything that you have, including their identifiers. For example, node ID 1, user ID 2, file ID 5, and so on. And if you were to have nodes on your site already, the upgrade process might collide with those ID, and then you might, have problems with the entities not matching the reference that they point to. So they recommend to start with the minimal installation profile. We're going to see an example later how you can go about this and work around this, but this will also allow me to explain some other assumptions that the Migrate API does. So in this case, uh, I'm going to try to do it from the UI. And if you follow this approach, you don't need to install any contributed module. This is like Drupal 8 or 9 out of the box. You basically go to extend, you look for migrate, and you enable the migrate module, migrate Drupal, and migrate Drupal UI. So when you install those three modules, you get a message saying that you now have an option to upgrade using the interface. So you click that, which is /upgrade, and you are presented with this page. You have some general information. I'm going to click continue because I have read what it is about. But then you come to this page where you get to choose, are you upgrading from Drupal 6 or Drupal 7? In this case, it's a Drupal 7. What type of database is it? In this case, it's MySQL. And then you need to provide the database connections settings. So in this case, localhost, because the configuration that I'm using is using Drupal VM, and in the same virtual machine, I have both of the databases. So basically, I just need to provide that information. And when you do an upgrade, Drupal is also going to try to migrate the files as well, both public and private ones. You can do that by specifying the path to the files inside the VM or the host. In this case, I'm going to set the host, which I can copy from here. And I'm going to just click review upgrade. Drupal is then going to try to connect to the database. You get some warnings, but this is where I wanted to end up. This is the kind of the last chance that you have before doing the automatic upgrade procedure. And what you see here is a summary of the things that Drupal has detected and that it considers it will be able to automatically upgrade for you. So in this case, if we look down here, it says that it is going to upgrade blogs, dates, emails, files, users, notes, and so on. But there are other things that, for now, they are not, they are not going to be migrated. So let's take some time to understand what are the assumptions that Drupal is doing in this case. The first is that by default, only modules that come with Drupal core offer an automatic upgrade path. So for example, if a module was in Drupal 7 core, but it was moved out, and in Drupal 9 it is not part of core, it may not have an automatic upgrade path. But on the contrary, for example, date, those were not part of Drupal 7 core, but they are part of Drupal 9 core. So there is an automatic upgrade path for those. So the main restriction is Drupal 9 by itself is only going to provide an upgrade path, an automatic one, for things that are in core. For other modules, it will depend to the module themselves to offer one or not. Another thing to note is that even though, for example, comments are available as an automatic upgrade path, they appear in the list of things that cannot be upgraded automatically. And the reason is because not only Drupal checks for what things are available in the code base, but also what modules are enabled. And if you want to automatically upgrade something, those modules need to be enabled both on Drupal 7 and in Drupal 9. So because we installed the minimal installation profile, many of those modules are not enabled. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to go back to the terminal and just like bulk enable many of the modules. Okay, after enabling the modules, I'm going to refresh and I can see that the list got shorter. Again, this is because new modules are enabled and that matches the expectation that both in Drupal 7 and Drupal 9, they need to be enabled. And Drupal is going to try to perform an automatic upgrade process. Another thing to notice that even if a module is in Drupal core, it might not have an automatic upgrade pass. For example, the color module, you will not get that automatically. Views, you will not get that automatically. And the Migrate team has already decided that it is too complex to provide an automatic upgrade pass for views. So you will have to recreate those manually when you move to Drupal 8 or Drupal 9. Another thing that might not be evident here, but you need to take into account how module changed from one version to another. For example, in Drupal 7, there was the block module, and that module was like only one existed. In Drupal 9, you have block and block content. One is for the configuration of the blocks, and the other one is for the instances of the blocks themselves. And you need to have both enabled, otherwise you will get like unexpected results. If you only have block, for example, and not block content, you will not actually get the instances when you do the automatic upgrade pass. And on the same token, in the list, you see Views UI, and we know for a fact that Views UI, like views in general, cannot be upgraded. So there are a lot of caveats in how this works, but in general, the rule is Drupal core only provides an upgrade path for their own modules in core, and those modules need to be enabled on both the old site and the new site. Another thing to note is that, for example, here, it says that the address field module in Drupal 7 would be able to be updated automatically using the address module in Drupal 9. So if you go to Drupal.org, these are actually two different modules, two different project pages. And that's another possibility. If a module is not available in Drupal 9, there might be an alternative module that not only provides similar functionality, but also offers an automatic upgrade path from the old implementation in Drupal 6 or Drupal 7. So with that in mind, I'm going to click Perform Upgrade, and all those messages that you see there are going to be logged to the database later. So you can come back to any errors that might appear. And then this is what you get out of the box. Before explaining it, I'm going to go to to change the themes to make it easier to navigate. In appearance, I am going to enable Bartik and 7. Actually, let's have a look at Claro. So I'm going to set Claro as the default backend theme. So let's go back to the site and let's see what we get out of the box. The homepage, it's here. The configuration for the node, the site title and the slogan, it's there. As you can see, like the menus are not here, the views are not here. But if I go to content, I am able to see that all the content types were created, and not only the content types, but like the nodes themselves were imported. So this is what you get out of the box. Drupal is going to do its best effort to migrate as much as possible with the assumptions that I mentioned before. Nodes IDs are going to be kept, users IDs are going to be kept, and so on. So be mindful of that. For the most part, this approach is only useful in the sense that you wouldn't have to do anything else if you have a very simple site, and if you want to like have the same content architecture in your new site. And most of the time, that is not the case. When you do an upgrade, you also want to make some changes, maybe clean up some things that are not working in the current site, or that there is no need to keep them in the new version of the site. So things like changing field types or entity types, for example, in what we're going to see later, is that these are content types, but we're going to import them as user entities. Books, in this case, are content types, but in the example at the end, we're going to import them as paragraph entities. So you are able to make this type of changes, and that's okay. The reason that I show like this approach first is because this is like the assumptions from the API, and you need to know like what limitations exist, because there are many more than just this that I mentioned. Just like get familiar with that. In one of the articles in the series, actually the last one, I go a little bit in depth about some general recommendations and assumptions from the API. And there are links to the official documentation where you can have like a full list of things that are recommended. So, or that are known issues that exist. So you prepare for that. That being said, again, this is like a best effort. What can we do? Like, what is the next step after following this approach? What I'm going to do for the next example is like, I'm going to basically blow up everything and start from scratch. And this is something nice about the the Migrate API, is that if something doesn't work, you can just like blow up everything and start from scratch. So what we're going to do now is use a module called Migrate Upgrade. And that Migrate Upgrade is going to give me the possibility to execute this same upgrade operation, but from the command line. And with that, it will be a little bit faster. And it also offers like other options that we're going to see in a moment. So if I refresh here, I see that I'm going, back to square one. So the way that the Migrate Upgrade module works is two things. It gives you a drush command. In this case, it's migrate column upgrade. Then you are expected to pass a legacy DB key. And what does this Drupal 7 means? This actually has to do with a setting in settings.php. So if I go to settings.php, this is where the databases are configured. This is like the default database for the Drupal 9 site. And I have another database configured for Drupal 7. In this case, you can see, the database name is Drupal 7, username, password, a driver, and so on. In this case, what we saw before Drupal 7 refers to this. If I were to change this to, all this is locked, but if I were to change this to migrate, for example, I will have to replace in the command line that string for migrate. But basically, this is like which database connection string you are going to use. So I'm going to go back to the command line. And now this legacy root. The legacy root is what is in my virtual machine, in my server, what is the path to the my Drupal 7 root, and this is going to be used later to import the files. So files, either public or private, will be imported automatically. I am going to remove this configure only for a second and execute this command just like this. And what we're going to see on the screen now is basically what we saw before, but in the UI. Drupal is going to detect what things are able to be upgraded automatically, and it will perform the operation. So basically the same, but from the command line. If I were to go to the site and I refresh, I can see, because I am still using the minimal installation profile, Bartik is not configured, but if I were to log in, my content will be here. So basically the same thing that I was able to do before from the command line, I can do here. What I'm going to do next, because this is the Migrate API, I can basically say I want, oops, sometimes it is important to, oops, oh, I'm going to blow everything up again. And I'm going to execute the command with an extra parameter now. And this is where things start to get getting useful and interesting, because in this new way of executing the migration with that extra parameter that we saw at the end, what is going to happen is that it will not run the operation automatically. It is only going to create the configuration files that we're going to see in a moment. So in this case, I'm going to enable a couple of modules that I need: migrate upgrade and migrate tools. So the migrate update module is the one that, let me check something. The migrate upgrade module is the one that gives me the command. So I'm going to execute it again. For upgrading, and the migrate tools module allows me to like import and roll back from the command line. So in this time, I only executed the configure only options. And if I refresh, there is no content. What can I do here? I can do a configuration export. And by doing a configuration export, I am going to get all the configuration from the site, but the things that I care about are the migrations. So let's have a look at how this works. If I go to the IDE, I can come to any of these. There are many, like 40-ish migrations total that in this particular case were generated. So this is what executing that command does for you. It will create automatically the YAML definition files that are going to be responsible for upgrading your content. And if I were to execute these files, I'm going to get the same result. So what is the benefit of doing this? The reason that I do it like in a two-step process is because now I can like cherry pick which files are going to be useful for me. and discard anything that I don't like. And for example, in a real life scenario, you might have a very tight deadline where you have to like work on the new Drupal 9 site, like do some site building, adding content types, adding fields, and so on, and at the same time work on the migration. So having that, minimal installation profile, having that like not being able to enter content into the website until the migration is completed, because you want to avoid conflicts with node IDs and the like. So that is very hard to accomplish like in real life. So what you do is like you generate the commands and then you like modify them as needed. For example, this is the user migration, if I remove the UID, everything was going to be migrated, but the ID itself, the user ID, is not going to be imported. So if I already have users on my system, uh, it will not be they will not be overridden. If you do this, you will have to take some extra measures to be able to make the proper relationships between entities. But the point is that the possibility is there. It is your option, and that's what you do. Similarly, for example, there are migrations for the different content types. Let us find one here. Like this is node type. This is like the configuration of the nodes themselves, and these are like like one migration per content type. So these are the articles, the pages, the books, the contacts, and so on. So what can you do? For example, if you want to change the contact from being nodes to being users, what you do, like the biggest and most important change is changing this line to entity colon user. And by doing that, you are instructing the API, hey, I don't want to create nodes, I want to create users instead. And of course, you will have to modify the process mapping, because some properties that exist in nodes do not exist in users. For example, there is no node ID. Instead, it would be a UID, and so on. You will have to make changes as needed. But the big benefit again is like once you have everything generated, you can cherry pick the things that you care about. So what I am going to do now is enable yet another module. So what this module does, it actually is, it's used as an example. It will create, okay. So that module actually works with some of the things that were generated in the previous command. So I'm just going to blow up everything again. But this module that is used as an example is responsible for two things. One is creating the structure of content type, vocabulary, paragraph, and everything that I need for my migration. And this is just like to save time. But basically what I did in this module is like select the 5, 10, 12 things that I needed, and I moved those to the module itself and made the changes that I mentioned before. So if I go to the website and I refresh, I can already see that I have some views. These are some views that are in the system. And if I log in, there is no content, but if I go to check, for example, for content types, the content types have been created. If I were to check for paragraph, there is a new paragraph type that has been created. So this module, the example that I'm using, is going to be responsible of creating this site structure. This is like what, for example, a site builder will be responsible to do. And when those things are created, then the migration can be executed. So as for the migration itself, if I go to the module to see what's going on there, so this is the module, and from the about 40 migrations that we saw before, I only selected about 10 of them. And you know, let's have a look at the one for going from the content type to the user entity. I literally just copy pasted the thing, and in this case, commented out just to show that what was here before. In real life, you don't need these comments in your migrations, and it's better not to have commented code like this to make it better to read. But what I did is like, okay, was changed to entity user. In addition to that, I am going to connect a paragraph. So there is some connection in here. And because I have this extra paragraph, I have some extra field mappings that I included to take care of the paragraph migration and the connection between the two entities. But for the most part, everything else is just like field mappings. The name for the user is going to be the title from the node before. The mail, the init configuration, I am reusing the same value from before. This is just like setting the properties of the user entity. And the same is for all the other things. Some of these are like literally copies without modifications. For example, the D7 file, the only thing that was changed was the path, but like everything else is the same. So to just demonstrate how all of these plays together, I am going to execute the migrations. And if I go to the site, I should see the content that was important. And again, in this case, I don't see book content types. I don't see the contact person content type. Those have been moved over to people. If I go to people, I can see Stefan, Michelle, and Benjamin that before were a separate content type. And if I make a change in the configuration here, and now I go to visit one, for example, Michelle, I can see that Michelle, the favorite book is this one. So this is a paragraph that was associated with the user entity. And again, like this is in Drupal 7, this was the equivalent of two separate content types that in Drupal 9 are now a new entity and one embedded inside the other. So this is the kind of things that that you can do when doing an upgrade. And we have the events, we have the products. Again, like the view themselves, those were not automatically migrated. I created them using the example module, but views are not possible to be migrated. But like everything else, like the content itself, it's there. So that's more or less the example. I want to open it up for questions, but one thing before that is like, as of today, Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 are mostly the same. Like the biggest difference is that Drupal 9 has removed any deprecated code and has increased the dependencies of PHP, MySQL, and so on. So in theory, you should be able to go directly from Drupal 6 to Drupal 7 to Drupal 9 without having to pass by Drupal 8. But as of today, you still need to consider other things. For example, if you have modules that have stable versions like stable releases for Drupal 8, but do not have stable releases for Drupal 9, then you cannot go directly to 9 unless you are okay finding an alternative module. For example, the address module has versions that are compatible with Drupal 8 and Drupal 9. So you can go directly to 9 if you only depend on that module. But there is another module, for example, social media links, that as of today, it doesn't have a Drupal 9 release. And even though it might be relatively simple compared to previous upgrades of modules, of custom modules, because there is no an automatic upgrade path for that, and there is no stable release for Drupal 9 itself, you still would have to wait in Drupal 8 or write the migration yourself. So that's kind of what might stop you to go directly to Drupal 9. It's like which modules are available as of today. But for the most part, like in terms of the Migrate API, they are basically the same. And yeah, I think that was a demo. These are some of the modules that I used in the demo. And in these articles, you can have like 40 plus modules that have something to do with the Migrate API. Some provide extra source or process or destination plugins or debugging tools and so on. And in the link below, you get an example, more details about the upgrade process. So that's the end of my presentation, but maybe this is the beginning of your journey. A reminder, we have the 31 Days of Migrations series, and the course will teach you, like, if you have never worked with migrations before, you will be able to learn a lot from them. And Agaric is offering full day trainings in 2 weeks. So that's a good chance to get professional training. And I would appreciate your feedback. The slides, the code, everything is open source, everything is available. So if you have questions after the fact, after exploring the code, you can send me an email or a tweet, and I will be happy to help. Are there any questions?
Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question verbally, or you can use the chat if you wish. So I've got one question. I remember back in Drupal 7, there was a really neat process where you could, based on, I forget what they called it, like a mapping table was made in the database that mapped like the old node ID with the new node ID, and how that enabled you to roll back updates. So if you update or roll back a migration of content, you can complete, you're never going to write the migration right the first time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So being able to go, run a migration, like, oh, I forgot this thing, and then roll it back and then run it again. Is there a similar thing in this way?
Yes. So if you are familiar with Drupal 7 migrations, like the ideas are there. The biggest difference is that the API, instead of having to write PHP code to create the migration scripts, now you use YAML. But what you described, those are called migrate mapping tables, and they exist. And if you go to the database, they are here. For example, this is for the event. So if I were to, do a select query, oops. Oh, sorry. If I were going to select everything from here, and Did I roll back anything at the end? Well, while I try to figure out what's happening, the answer is yes. The mapping tables exist. Another thing is that um, you can, as you described, roll back and import as many times as needed. Those commands are provided by the Migrate Tools module. So with that module enabled, you can roll back as much as needed and import again. And actually, it is recommended to, like, if you are doing a big migration, to go like one field at a time, to go one content type at a time, and so on. That is in the series. There are two articles that talk about that, the number 6 and the number 21st. This is kind of a workflow of how you would work. You will do a migrate import. You see that something worked. Then you do a rollback. You add new changes. You rebuild your caches, and you import again. And you will repeat that process over and over until you finish that migration. The one thing that you need to pay attention is that in Drupal 8 and 9, there are two ways to manage migrations. One is in code and one is as configuration entities. So this workflow is for when you manage your migrations as code. If you manage your migration as configuration entities, which you can read these articles for more information, the workflow is a little bit different. For one, you need an extra module for this to work. That module is Migrate Plus. And after doing that, you need to, because these are configurations, you need to do like a configuration import or use migrate devel or use drush config partial import. So it's not like clearing caches is not enough. You actually need to follow whatever approach you follow for configuration management changes to take effect. Yeah, this is the one. It's the wrong article. So this is what I was saying. You do a config import, a migrate rollback. But if then you make any changes, you can use drush config import partial, or you can use a CMI to import everything, or you can use the migrate devel module. So you need to be mindful as to what approach you are following, like are my migrations code or they are configuration. And even like the location is different. If you put them as code, they go under a /migrations folder. If you put them as configuration, they go in a /config/install folder. So I guess the short answer is yes, that functionality still exists in Drupal 8 and Drupal 9, but there are more caveats around where the migration themselves are located and what is the workflow to follow to detect the changes, like in that incremental operations that you are doing.
Cool. And then that then kind of follows into being able to associate the correct entity references. So say you're importing taxonomy terms, they might not come in as the same ID.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to relate that properly, you'd have to look it up in that mapping table in order to change that in the glue part.
Yes, and this is what I am doing in this particular example of associating the paragraph with the user entities. But basically, because you don't know in advance what the IDs are going to be, the Migrate API offers plugins, process plugins to do that. So you say there is a migration lookup, and then you pass, what is the migration that you want to connect to, and by doing this, the system itself is going to look in the migrate map tables and fetch the right value. So it will say, for example, node 15 now correspond to user ID 10. So it's going to fetch that value for you and return it. But yeah, there are mechanisms provided by the API itself to accommodate for changes in the IDs.
Anybody else have questions, comments?
I'd just like to say thank you for giving this speech, because I know we're facing a large migration group in the near future, and this has taken away a little bit, just a little bit, of the fear and trepidation I've been feeling looking at it. I believe we're signed up actually for your course, and I'm looking forward to that, because I feel like from what you've shown today, maybe this isn't out of reach after all. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us in 2 weeks. Yeah, and I know that this was super fast, but even though like, I have been doing migrations for more than 5 years, and sometimes my expectations don't work as expected, like this thing is not populated, or things like missing a space in your YAML definition file break the whole migration. Like that literally will break, and it might or might not have a helpful error message. So you need to have a lot of experience. And in the articles, I talk about recommendations, tips. And one of the things that I do recommend is like, start with a working example, something that you know that works, and break it on purpose so you get familiar with the errors that you get. So next time that you are like in a project with like on a tight deadline, if you have found that error before, it's easier to identify what the problem might be. It seems that there are questions in the chat, but I hadn't seen them.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks. This was super helpful. I get the ETL approach, and I think it's something that, we've been sort of, kicking the can down the road in terms of actually going in and seeing exactly, which modules we've loaded, enabled, but don't use, and also looking at potentially taking our proprietary or custom content types and maybe externalizing them and serving them up over a message bus, just to kind of break some of the dependency we do have on Drupal. That's not any shade on Drupal at all. Some of the stuff we're doing in terms of our business logic shouldn't actually be, in the server itself. It should maybe be served up at a different layer. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah, one thing about, might be related to this is that it might be apparent, but the Migrate API will only be able to migrate configuration and content. If you have a custom theme or if you have custom modules, the Migrate API is not for that. At least for modules, there are projects like Drupal Rector that will be able to help you rewrite the code to the new APIs. Another thing is that there are modules to help with like planning the migration themselves. There is literally a module called Migration Planner that you can connect to your Drupal 7 database, and it will spill out a report of all your content types or your fields, so you can have a look at what things I want to keep, what things I want to change. And for example, if a module, let's say you were using field collections before, that doesn't have in Drupal 8 or Drupal 9, what the community is doing for the most part is using paragraph. So there is, as of 2 weeks ago or something like that, a patch that is basically ready to be committed to the paragraph module, so that you can literally like automatically migrate from field collections to paragraph in Drupal 8. The thing is that as many things in Drupal, this is constantly evolving, and you need to keep an eye on the latest changes and advancements in the API.
So leading up to this presentation, I joined the, what's the Slack channel? The migration Slack channel on Drupal Slack. And it seems to be very active in there. People ask questions and get answers. So I would definitely, if you're working on a migration, hanging out there probably would be kind of helpful, not only just for you to see what questions you might run into. You can see how people are solving problems on their end.
Yeah, Yeah, the Migrate maintainers are very, very helpful, and they are conveniently distributed around the world. So basically you can ask a question anytime and someone will be able to answer. And if not, the Migrate maintainers, a lot of volunteers, including myself, we offer support for free there, on our spare time. And one of the places where you can keep an eye on the changes to the API, you go to this page, the change records for Drupal core, and you look for migrate without the final E, so that it looks for migrate and migrations. And then, for example, as of 7 days ago, something new came along to improve how you migrate from 7 to 8 or 7 to 9, for example. So I'm going to paste this link in the chat for reference. But yeah, either this page or Slack, there are weekly meetings every Thursday. There was one like 2 hours ago. So you can have a sense of how the API is evolving. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Mauricio. Yeah.